Okay, thank you very much for the technical help, and it's a great pleasure to be at this very nice event. And actually, it was very interesting to hear these talks. And actually, I think now we are sort of doing a journey in time now, because what I'm talking now is about regulation. And regulation normally comes into the picture when a development is very close to its manifestation. So in this case, I think if we are talking about 3D printed medicinal products or devices, manifestation for me at least means that when it gets to the patients. And then it's the time when regulation kicks in. But I want to use this opportunity also to emphasize that it is also very important to think about regulatory issues much before the time when actually someone wants to authorize the product or make it approved. Because it seems in drug development, in global drug development more and more, that regulatory aspects drive the development. And actually, I've just heard that at many major pharma companies, leaders of global drug development come from the regulatory affairs department, because it's so important. So I just would like to now highlight some of the aspects with regard to 3D printing. And I just want to tell you also in advance that there is not much that we know about regulation now, because the field is emerging now, and it's quite new for regulators. One of the questions that I always like to ask, if we understand each other, because especially in the early development, the scientists coming from basic science, engineers in this case, are working on something that actually should be specified in a way that at the end of the day, regulatory agencies will accept. And sometimes we feel at the agency that the requirements that are quite clear for us is not known for the developers or not understood by the developers. And sometimes we don't understand the developers' thinking. So I think it is also very important that we try to approach each other and try to have very good understanding. This is especially true for drug development. And here I would like to also mention that there is a new role of the agencies. And this is also true in the US and in Europe, that from a gatekeeper position where regulatory agencies believed that their major role is to control what is going to patients, it somehow now goes to a direction where apart from controlling, it is also very important to support development. So it's sort of an enabler's position. And I'm also very happy that it's true for the European Medicines Agency, and also true for our Hungarian agency, that we really prioritize this kind of activity. What I will talk about a little bit is the so-called ATMP regulation. ATMP stands for Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products. And although it is not quite clear at this very moment, but it seems that many of the 3D printed tissues, organs in the future, or cells, will be regulated under this framework, the ATMP framework, because the regenerative medicines using cell or tissue engineering actually is considered advanced therapy now, and it is independent of the manufacturing process. So either it is manufactured in a traditional way or by 3D printing. advanced therapy medicinal products has a special legislation. So although they are medicinal products, but they are very different, much more complex. So actually the regulators more than 10 years ago realized that there is a need for a very specific legislation in Europe. And why this happened? Because ATMPs in some respects are very special. For example, they have to be differentiated from transplants. This is one example. Because cells here and cells there, but in one case they are not considered as medicinal products, in the other case they are considered as medicinal products. And the difference here is very, very important. Because as you could also hear from the previous talks, it's an extremely expensive process to develop a medicine. It's not comparable to a simple transplantation method. If someone develops a medicinal product, and it can be actually a tissue preparation, which is for a non-expert quite difficult to differentiate from a transplant, then it requires a lot of preclinical studies, requires clinical studies, and so on, and then the costs really go to the sky. So it is very important to know what someone develops actually. Is it a medicinal product or not? And one thing that differentiates between the two is the so-called substantial manipulation. This means that if the cells are manipulated in a way that their phenotypic characteristics, for example, change significantly, then it can be a medicinal product. Just to give you an example, if the cells are cultured as part of the manufacturing process, then it will be a medicinal product. But if the cells are actually taken from the patients and only a centrifugation step is part of the manufacturing process, then it will not be a medicinal product. And this simple thing, you culture the cells or you just centrifuge the cells, lead the development to completely different directions. One more specialties of ATMP is that the so-called risk-based approach can be used. For a normal drug development, there are very specific guidelines that actually show the developers what are the requirements that they have to fulfill and what are the specific characteristics of a certain drug that it should comply with. However, for ATMPs, because they are very complex, there is an option that the developer can say that, okay, I know my product very well, I know the risks that it will have for the patients, so I can tell you what are the most important things that we have to take care of when it goes to the patients. This is called the risk-based approach, and it can only be used for these specific product types. There is also a balance between standardization and case-by-case approach. This is again because of these specialties, and since it is an innovative field, it changes quite rapidly. However, it is also very important to say that ATMPs are not special in many respects. Actually, they are under the medicinal product legislation, both in the US and in Europe, and they have to be prepared for a defined diagnosed disease. So one cannot say that I have a very nice stem cell product and it really cures everything. It will not work. The developer have to find the proper indication for their product. The effect should be measurable. It is actually one of the major problems with advanced therapy products, that the efficacy is often not as good as people would think. And these kind of products often developed for orphan diseases. Orphan diseases are the ones that affect very little number of people. And then it is very, very difficult to measure properly the efficacy. If you have 20 patients, then how can you really decide on if a product is good quality? Yes?
Is efficacy as important as risk?
So with medicinal products, the final decision is made on a benefit-risk balance. So the benefits should be higher than the risks. But the benefit is coming from the efficacy, and actually, if it's not measured quite properly, then the risks will be the more important. So that's why it is very important. So all medicinal products should demonstrate quality, safety, and efficacy. And quality here is a very important thing. This means that the manufacturing of a medicinal product should be standardized, and and developers should ensure that the manufacturing is consistent from batch to batch. And it is very important if you think about cells and tissues, because they are biological products. So if you work in a lab with the living things, that you know that it is really tough. And I see actually here a big advantage of 3D printing technology, because my feeling is that standardization can be easier with this technology. And of course, these drugs are extremely expensive. This is a problem. So why they are difficult? The ATMPs, the classification, how to really decide if you have a drug, if you have a tissue-based drug or a cell-based drug or a gene technology-based drug. The regulation is complex and not easy to understand, and for this very the developing fields not sometimes don't even exist. The characterization is very complex if you compare a small molecule drug to a cell. The efficacy can be problematic, and this is the very end of the development. But as we heard from Professor Akai, that he wanted that there are companies instead of labs, or the labs are actually companies. And I think it is very important that developers should also think about how the reimbursement will be possible for the products, because there can be very great ideas if no one would pay for it. And actually there is a very sad example. The first gene therapy medicinal product, Glybera. Actually it was approved in Europe in 2011, I think. And for many years no patient was treated. And at the end, I think last year the first patient was treated in Germany, and the treatment costs $1 million. And actually not any other national insurer would pay for this. So there is a very nice product that can help people, but it's so expensive that the countries will not pay for it. So if one starts to develop something, it is also worth considering if once at least someone would pay for it. Okay, so I talked a lot about, in general, ATMPs, but what are the ATMPs actually? These are the gene therapy medicinal products, the cell-based products, and the tissue-engineered products. And there is also one important group, is the combined products. These contain a medical device as an integral part of the product. And 3D printing again comes here to the picture, because there are actually many products in clinical trials now where there is a matrix for the cells, and often they are manufactured by 3D printing. Two things that can be important for us here: tissue-engineered products. Tissue-engineered products are containing cells or tissues, and their major role actually is to regenerate, repair, or replace a human tissue. For cell-based products, it's a little bit different, but it is also very important to really be clear with what I develop as a developer, because the requirements will be different. If I say that I have a product that has important pharmacologic action or metabolic action on the human body, then the developers should really prove it. If I say that it's only for replace a human tissue, then the requirements will be different. So it is very important. Also for combined ATMPs. Combined ATMPs contain an integral medical device, and if there is a medical device, it has to comply with a different regulation. So actually, in a way, it actually makes the development even more complex. And I have to say that it makes the assessment of the product very complex for us, the regulators, because we need also the expertise from the medical device guys, and also need expertise from cell biologists and so on, and regulators, really hardcore regulators. And it's very complex to assess these kind of products. So actually, this also gives an answer to why is it so long process to really have something approved. Because we need to collect expertise, especially in small countries like Hungary. But I can say also that in Europe, we are quite behind the US, because FDA is very proactive in this. And the European Medicines Agency also have some initiatives, but I think we have a lot to learn from FDA in this respect. If someone has a combined ATMP, then the question arises if it has a CE mark, Certificate of Excellence mark, it should be traceable. The donation, procurement and testing of human cells should comply with another regulation. This is the cells and tissue regulation. So it's the third big group of regulations that someone has to comply with. The quality of starting and raw materials are very important. The labeling, shipment should be really standard and should be really carefully thought about. And the detailed risk assessment, of course, should be done. But this is true also for other type of products. So, okay, someone, let's say, that has already done all the development work with taken into account all the regulatory requirements, and then the marketing authorization is coming. In Europe, this is a centralized procedure, and actually there is a separate group for this at the European Medicines Agency. This is the Committee for Advanced Therapies, and there are renowned experts, both regulators, university professors, and medical doctors, pharmacists, and so on, who has some experience with advanced therapy medicinal products. And actually they make their opinion about the product that is actually later on passed to the European Commission, which will approve at the very end the product. In order to help developers, and I think it can be important for any of you who think about later on going to really development, establish a startup company and so on, there are tools that are provided to help developers to navigate in the regulatory maze. For example, for classification, this is for free, and this is given by the European experts, and it helps to decide if the product is a medicinal product, if it is an ATMP, and if it's an ATMP, which group it belongs to. It's a 60-day procedure, it's not so long, and anyone can actually apply for this. Although the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, always emphasize that it's legally not binding, because normally classification is done at the beginning of the development, and the characteristics of the product can change. So actually the classification may change, but normally if there is a discussion between the regulatory agencies and the developers, it's already a big plus. So normally companies use this opportunity as a first engagement with the regulatory agency. There is also another tool. It is so-called certification, and actually it helps to answer the question, are we on the right track? So developers can send their data to the agency and tell where are they at this very moment, what is the direction of the development, and then regulators say that, okay, it's good, this is a good preclinical package, this is a good phase 1 trial design, and it seems fine. If everything is okay, then a certification is given by the European Medicines Agency with a detailed report and list of issues, and it's also a big help. And this certification then later on can be used for the marketing authorization also, saying that, okay, I already had a certification, so I know what I do normally. There are also other support tools in Europe. One of them is the Innovation Task Force briefing meetings. This is for companies at the very, very early stage of development. So they just go to London and from February to Amsterdam to the European Medicines Agency and say that I have this development, just say what you think. And actually it's a very, very informal presentation and discussion later on. There is also formal scientific advice. This is very strict rules, so it's for more developed developments. And an SME office for small and medium-sized companies. So there is a lot of tools, and it's very important that developers know about this, because there is a lot of help around. So you don't really have to do everything alone. And nationally in Hungary, we also have the Innovation Office for the development of early projects, and actually it's also for free, and we just give regulatory and scientific advice. There is also one very interesting option if a product will not go through the normal marketing authorization procedure. And this is the so-called hospital exemption. I think this can be very useful for 3D printed medicinal products because for some products, if they are not routinely manufactured, which is not easy to decide what is routine manufacturing, but let's say that there is a patient that needs a very special replacement, tissue replacement that can be printed, 3D printed, using the patient's own cells, for example. So it's very custom made. And it's a medicinal product. If it's a medicinal product, that the medicinal product legislation will apply. Of course, for one single tissue replacement therapy, no one would go for a full marketing authorization. It wouldn't make sense. And in this case, the hospital exemption comes to the picture, because in this case, under the responsibility of the treating physician, the National Medicinal Agency can actually authorize the product. And this is true for whole Europe. So it's very good. It's a loophole. It actually was developed, this tool, the hospital exemption, as a loophole for products that were already on the market before 27, when the ATMP regulation actually was established. And actually it lowers the regulatory burden also for academic institutions. So it is a very interesting option, and actually that's why we also encourage always developers to come to the national agencies and ask questions how they can really put their products on the market, or just put the product into the hands of the doctors, because there are always options, and then we can discuss these things. Yeah, so lastly, some words about the current situation about 3D printed medicinal products. So as I already said, FDA is quite advanced in this respect. They have already reviewed more than 100 devices that were 3D printed, and there is also one 3D printed drug that is approved. It's Spritam, and I don't know if you have already heard about it, but it has a very special characteristics that it dissolves extremely fast. And this drug is therefore to treat epilepsy and very hard seizures. So actually the epileptic patient can just take it. It's an oral medication, but it dissolves immediately in the mouth. And they use a special 3D printing technology for this. So FDA has already approved something. Yes. Yes, advanced, yes. And they have actually, FDA has their own 3D printing machines, so they do their own research really to understand what is going on outside. This is quite missing in Europe, actually. We have a different approach here. They also have an emerging technology program. It's similar to the Innovation Task Force program of the European agency. They have a new device for, a new guideline for device manufacturers, and they now investigate the regulatory framework on medicinal products. So there is a very active thinking in this field. If we see the situation in the European Union, I can tell you that 3D printing is on the agenda of the European Innovation Network. This innovation network contains all the innovation offices of the agencies, and the next meeting will be in November, and one of the major agenda points is 3D printing technologies. So actually, we know about it, regulators know about it, and try to see what would be the best approach. There is already one ATMP classification, but I can also tell you that there is only one ATMP classification that was done so far, and actually it contains a 3D printed polymer matrix, but no other product with 3D printed technology came to even classification. So actually that's why we regulators don't really see now, or by now I would say, what is really going on in Europe, because we don't see the products. We only see the products if they come to us. There are also other approaches, more proactive approaches to really know what is going on, but only one company approached us so far, or the European Medicines Agency, with such a request. And there was also one innovation task force meeting, and it was about bioprinting opportunities or bioprinting systems in hospitals. So it was a very regulatory discussion, and really very early discussion. So this is where we are at this very moment. And the regulatory considerations that I think developers should make. First thing can be the bio-ink with autologous cells. As I already said, donation, procurement and testing should be done according to the EU tissue and cell regulation. This is very important if anyone in Europe uses autologous cells. The medical device regulation. It changes now in Europe. There is a new regulation, the MDR it's called, the Medical Device Regulation, that replaces the Medical Device Directive, and it has some changes. But all the printers, the software, custom-made devices actually may fall under this legislation. And it is also important that the custom-made devices has a narrower understanding in this new legislation. So previously, a lot of things could be seen as custom-made device. Now it's different. And about the bioprinted medicinal products, if they are engineered, these products, then most probably they will be considered a substantial manipulation, and then they will be medicinal products under the ATMP legislation. If they are ATMP, and actually this is the worst thing that people want to hear, then GMP, good manufacturing practice, will kick in. That means that there is extremely rigorous conditions of the manufacturing. The fortunate thing is that since last year there is a GMP regulation for ATMPs, and it is special for this product type because it was realized that not the same guidance can be used for small molecule drugs and cells. And the last thing, that there is a safety monitoring for 30 years that is required for ATMPs. So one should also think about these things when a development starts. And I think the question here is if the current regulation is sufficient, or adaptation or new legislation needed for 3D printed medical devices or 3D printed medicinal products. And I don't really or cannot really answer this question by now, but it seems, and my feeling is that the European Commission and most of the regulators think that the current legislation should be fine enough to also regulate this product category. So I would not expect major changes actually in the legislation. So I think the best is to really get to know the current requirements. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.